Hi everyone, and welcome to the Star Wars Reading Club book review of Aftermath Empire's End by Chuck Wendig. And we'll jump right into the review here. I think if I had to choose one word to sum up my feelings about the novel, unfortunately it would be disappointed. And it's not to say that there weren't great elements, there definitely were a lot of great elements within the novel. We'll get into some of the better ones and some of the more disappointing ones in just a second. But overall, if you take the characters, the plot, the ending for sure, and just the three novels as the trilogy together, I was left disappointed for sure by the end of the novel. And I think that what I had to do is I had to be careful that I wasn't putting my expectations and what I was hoping to get, and a lot of the theories that I had come up with before reading the novel, I had to make sure I wasn't putting up those expectations against what we actually got. So I ended up holding off on the review for a couple of days. I was initially going to do it on Sunday, but I do have to say that even after taking those days off, I think a lot of my initial disappointments still hold true. And overall, I would just have to say that it was a disappointing ending to the trilogy. But one of the bigger disappointments and one of the things that really got me off on the wrong foot was I just felt like the novel was too long. And a lot of times the story and the main plot just moved far too slow. There's never really been a Star Wars novel that I can remember, and I have been fortunate to have read a lot of the good ones at this point. But I don't think, and I can't remember a Star Wars novel where I was thinking about skipping chapters and skipping ahead, which just tells you, or tells me for sure, that I felt like a lot of the storylines were really segregated from each other. That the main plot that was unfolding, a lot of times Chuck Wendig would veer away from it and tell these side stories that I thought were a lot less interesting than the one that was unfolding on Jakku. So I thought that definitely did not help the novel. I think it took too long to get going. I believe I made a note where Rax, we didn't see him until page 160, which 1/3 through the novel, we haven't seen Rax yet. I just thought that the beginning moved far too slow. And I thought that perhaps you could have made the novel 50 to 70 pages shorter for sure. But also too, and I do have to admit that I was probably a bigger fan of the series than the average reader. It's been a pretty controversial trilogy, if I had to say. But I think my fandom of the first two novels really hinged on the fact that it was building to what I thought was going to be a great third act. And we just didn't get it, I don't feel, in this one. And then lastly, I would just say one of the main reasons why I was disappointed was I didn't get the strong, tangible ending that I wanted. I felt like the ending created more questions than it provided answers. I was really hoping we were going to get a strong end to the Empire and then a tangible transition into the First Order. And I think that we'll see that there was a lot more questions that were created by the end than there were answers. Now, just to be certain, again, it's not to say that there weren't great elements and that there weren't exciting sections of the novel, but just in terms of recommendations, I don't think you have to rush into the Aftermath series, just from reading it myself. Certainly if you're going to pick and choose which canon novels you read, and I do think that a lot of people do that just from talking to everyone on Twitter and YouTube and on Twitch, if you pick and choose, I would say that you can probably hold off on the Aftermath series. It's always going to be there if you want to pick it up at any point. But if you want to jump into, say, the canon novels Catalyst or Lost Stars, I haven't read myself, but it has been highly recommended. But even a novel like Tarkin, A New Dawn, those novels, I would say start there before Aftermath. Certainly, if you want to read the end of the Empire and what amounts to the beginning of the transition of the First Order, then certainly pick it up. But I do think that it is a series that you can hold off on. And if you want to read some really good canon Star Wars novels, there's other ones to start with. Now, just in speaking about some of the stronger aspects of the novel, in my opinion, and just moving into the characters, I'd have to say that my two favorite characters were Gallius Rax and Rey Sloane. Particularly Gallius Rax over Sloane. There's some really big Sloane fans out there. I wouldn't put myself amongst them, but I do have to say that those two were probably my favorite. And we'll get into Rax and Sloane a little bit later on in the review here, but I should just say that Rax was probably my favorite character that's emerged within the new canon novels. Just a great character, always jumped off the page for me. I found those sections of the novel the most interesting, the scenes that featured Rax. Again, I wish Wendig would have used him a bit more. He doesn't show up until page 160, but just right from the beginning, just the fact that he was tied in with Palpatine as Palpatine's contingency plan, all of that stuff was just great in my opinion, and we'll see a little bit more about all that in just a little bit later on in the review. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, though, his speech just before the Battle of Jakku. I thought that that was a great speech as well. I thought that there was a good connection between Rax's speech and Hux's speech in The Force Awakens. And just as a point of distinction between Empire and what would become the First Order, I thought that that was just a really good mark of the transition from Empire to First Order. I really enjoyed that speech. So I would definitely put Rax up there with a character like Krennic, just in terms of being my favorite to have emerged from the new canon. But one of the most disappointing aspects of the novel, and I really don't know how it came about or what to make of it, but really the most disappointing aspect was just I felt so disconnected from the lead protagonists. There's not even really much for me to say about characters like Nora and Sinjir and Jas, even Temmin to a certain extent, although I did like Temmin much more than the other ones in this novel. I felt that they were cold. I questioned some of their decisions. I don't think that a lot of it was realistic in the end, just in terms of what happened with Sinjir particularly. But I was hoping that there was more consequences for these characters, particularly with Nora. She really was, in this novel, really blinded by rage and revenge against Sloane. And really, that was her singular focus. The point where she, almost in a manic way, jettisons from the ship to get to Jakku and leaves Temmin behind. I was just hoping that there was more consequences for them. And at the end of the day, everything just rolled up nicely for those main characters. When really I didn't think that Nora was going to make it out alive throughout the entirety of the novel. So when they did, particularly with Nora, I mean, by the end of the novel, although Brenton dies, and really Temmin could have died multiple times throughout the Battle of Jakku, I mean, she just at the end of the day accepts everything and ends up forgiving herself. So I was hoping that Chuck Wendig would have made some more consequences for these characters, and really not have made everything so easy, although they did certainly go through hard, difficult points in the novel. I was hoping that there was more consequences for them. I don't think that Sinjir's head advisor role to Mon Mothma was all that realistic. Certainly an interesting character development from him to go to loyalty officer for the Empire to head advisor for Mon Mothma. But again, I don't think that it was all that realistic of a choice. One of the most surprising aspects for Sinjir, though, I should note, that I thought at the end of Life Debt that he had come to the he came to the revelation that he was best when he was working to protect his friends, and that really he would do anything to that end. But then we saw that he was completely separated and not at all part of the Battle of Jakku, and just left Nora, Jas, and Temmin there all by himself. So I did think that it was interesting, maybe not the best choice to make him completely separated from the Battle of Jakku. And really, when I mentioned earlier that there was chapters that I wanted to completely skip through, the ones with Sinjir at the end working for Mon Mothma were certainly one of them. I really wanted to just get back to the Battle of Jakku. And then Jas, same thing. I mean, she had her evolution along with Sinjir, both sort of finding their stars, as she put it, and certainly became more ethical characters. But I mean, the nice part with Jas is we did get to bring back characters like Embo and Dengar, but really, again, not much consequences for these characters. And I did feel that they were sort of cold by the end. And really, I was hoping that Chuck Wendig made it a bit tougher on them at the end, and they went through some of the consequences that they would have had to face. Particularly Nora. I mean, her singular focus on revenge, I don't think it should have been completely tied up nicely for her at the end. One of the more surprising aspects of the novel was just how big of a role Mon Mothma had, but then also how few scenes Han and Leia had in the novel. Just starting with Mon Mothma, I actually like the evolution of Mon Mothma throughout the entire trilogy. It seemed almost that she was a bit naive in the first Aftermath novel, and then evolved in a way where she became much more politically intelligent and really could start navigating through, what would become the New Republic. And I hope I have it right, but I believe she was the Chancellor all the way up until, I believe Bloodline is 5 years before The Force Awakens. So she's going to spend 20 years plus as the Chancellor. And it really established nicely just how she would have been able to make it through those 20 years and been such a great leader. But I thought that she was strong, really intelligent. Some of the aspects in the middle of the novel were much more enjoyable than the end of the novel. I thought that Wendig might have cut off the political intrigue aspects and focus more on the Battle of Jakku at the end. I did hope that those Sinjir Mon Mothma aspects, again too, by the end of the novel I was really hoping that we would just move through those quickly. But I did like the character of Mon Mothma for sure. And then just in regard to Han and Leia, again, not much to say about them. I was surprised with how little of a role they had, because they did have a significant role in the second novel for sure. But it was nice to see that Han was really uneasy with his less adventurous role and just moving into what would be the father of Ben Solo. So there was good foreshadowing there just with what would happen ultimately later on with their relationship. And then I did also like the tie-in with this novel. We had the birth of Ben Solo, of course, who would go on to become Kylo Ren. There was a nice tie-in that he was born on the day that the Instruments of Surrender were signed. So really a nice, again, just like the Rax speech, just a really nice point of distinction going from one era into the next. So I did really enjoy the Mon Mothma character, and then really the Han and Leia scenes, they were just what they were. And now moving on to what was certainly my favorite aspect of the novel was just the revelation and what we learned about the ultimate plan with Rax and Palpatine, wherein pretty much Rax was the contingency plan of Palpatine if the Empire should ever be destroyed in some manner. But by far my favorite chapter was the Interlude Chapter, and this one just had Palpatine start to bring Rax into his destiny of where he was going to carry out the contingency plan. So just a quick explanation with this Interlude Chapter. What happened was Palpatine's explaining a game which is generally just chess. I believe it's called Shatez. But the lesson that Palpatine is trying to teach Rax, again if they're talking about the different pieces on the chessboard, what amounts to chess anyway. But the primary lesson that Palpatine wants to teach Rax, that if the Empire can't protect its Emperor, then the Empire isn't fit to exist, and then the Empire is also deemed a failure. So Palpatine's trying to put it in Rax's head that if something should ever go wrong with the Empire, then he needs to be there to destroy the Empire pretty much and then start anew. So I really liked that. I did have to question, and really last night I was thinking about it a lot more, whether or not Palpatine's expectation that something may or may not have gone wrong lessens the character and the plan of Palpatine, particularly when you look at the Prelude chapter, where Palpatine says to Rax, just right before the Battle of Endor, that we're going to probably have to put the contingency into place. So I was wondering if it maybe stepped on the scenes from Return of the Jedi just a little bit, just where I was questioning if Palpatine was fully confident that he'd be able to turn Luke. But I think it worked at the end of the day. And Chuck Wendig did add some really good quotes just to make sure that I don't think it stepped on the scenes from Return of the Jedi too much. But basically, the Emperor doesn't think that the Empire is a failure, or at that point, it's going to go in the direction where the rebels are going to win. But basically, it just says that one must admit that it is possible. And in that possibility, it's wise to play the very long game. So I did think that it did work out in the end. But I did really enjoy that plan. I liked that was the reveal for Palpatine, and particularly Rax's character. And I liked the plan that they had. But just getting into what the reveal was for the facility on Jakku. At first, as I was reading it, I didn't know what to expect. I thought perhaps there would be a connection with Snoke. Perhaps as we were going along, we were going to find something there that would manipulate or change the children that Brendel Hux was ultimately working with. So basically what the facility on Jakku turned out to be was just the fact that Palpatine had established a number of them all across the galaxy. This one was established, like many of them, well before the Empire ever came into fruition. And the different facilities had different purposes. Some of them would house ancient Sith artifacts. Some of them would have powerful weapon designs. Some of them would actually experiment on people. But I did actually find this really interesting, and this was probably one of the things that I did change my opinion on in the couple of days that I waited for this review. At first I was a bit disappointed with this reveal, but I have come to enjoy it more, and I do think that there's a lot of interesting aspects that will come out of it. But the Jakku facility ends up just being part of the contingency plan that Palpatine and Rax had. And what the facility is it contains a number of ancient computers, basically, that are plotting a course into the unknown regions, which I thought was at first disappointing, but I've actually really come to enjoy that was what the reveal was. And basically the need for that is because there's so many different storms and black holes. Basically the unknown regions have been cut off from the known galaxy, and nobody can really venture out there. So within the facility, there's all these computers that are helping plot the course into the unknown regions, which actually is really cool because that's how the remnant of the Empire, which becomes the First Order, ultimately gets into the unknown regions. So basically the end goal of the Jakku facility is just to help take the remnant of the Empire into the unknown galaxy. So I thought that was really interesting. And also too, one thing where just made me kind of smile and just say, give a nice excited, just kind of a sigh and a woo of excitement, was just the fact that we see that Thrawn was mentioned as helping to chart the course into the unknown regions. So we do see Thrawn show up, just a brief statement in a thought from Rax, just in regard to that he was from the unknown regions. So I thought that was a nice connection to the Thrawn of Legends. But one of the things I question, I don't know why Chuck Wendig would put this in, but it just states that Thrawn's knowledge of the unknown regions was the only reason that Palpatine kept him around. And I just question why he would put that in. I mean, I don't think it would be the only reason why Palpatine would keep Thrawn. We just have to look at what he's doing in Rebels. Just the amount of success and his ability as a Grand Admiral. So I wonder why Chuck Wendig put that in. It devalues Thrawn a bit, in my opinion, and doesn't really appreciate his full talents. But I did like that basically what those computers on Jakku were doing was plotting the course into the unknown regions. So I really enjoyed just the whole plan that Palpatine and Rax had. The part where Rax was going to fulfill the contingency plan of the Empire if it ever went so far as the Emperor dying and the Empire not being what it needed to be to fulfill its role. Then Rax was supposed to start a new empire in an unknown region. And I did think at the end of the day, the reveal on what the facility on Jakku was, I did think that was pretty interesting at the end of the day. So I did really enjoy seeing ultimately what the reveal was of the relationship between Palpatine and Rax. I thought that it was great that Rax ultimately became the person who was to fulfill the contingency plan of Palpatine. I really enjoyed that. Well, one of the aspects, though, that I wish we saw was just who Rax sent ahead aboard the Emperor's ship, the Eclipse. It mentions that he sent a number of different officers and people a part of the Empire who were loyal. So it would have just been really cool to see who it was that was in the Eclipse. I wish that we had gotten a chance to see something or who was a part of that ship. Fingers crossed, maybe Thrawn, but I don't think so. But another really interesting aspect was just the connection between Brendel Hux and the children of the First Order, or what I would assume becomes the children of the First Order. I thought that the scene where Rax commands the children to attack the stormtroopers in the dark. I thought that that was just an excellent, fascinating scene. And it's going to be really interesting to see exactly how those children, what role they have in the First Order to come. Rax suggests, just from the statements that he was saying, it suggests that they're going to become officers of the First Order. So, I mean, it seems like the First Order is going to take that next step to become even more brutal and unforgiving than even the Empire that we've seen so far. So I did like the elements introduced just in regard to the children of the First Order. And just speaking about Brendel Hux, we do have to speak of his son Armitage Hux, of course, who's General Hux in The Force Awakens. But Armitage, again, pretty much hated by his father, so we do get to see some good character development of what's going to become General Hux. But I also like the scene where Rax commands these children to listen and serve Armitage. So we do get to see some good development of what's going to become General Hux in The Force Awakens, and hopefully some really good scenes in Episode 8 and 9. So I am looking forward to see how those children, what role they play in the First Order, and again, just a really nice evolution and some good character development for General Hux as well. Now, we got a number of pretty interesting interludes in this novel, like we had in the previous two novels, and some of them I'm more ambivalent of, and I thought that sometimes, particularly at the end of the novel, just the interludes did interfere with the pacing, and the last couple ones were pretty brutal, in fact. But I'll just hit the interludes pretty quickly on what we saw, and talk about just some of the more interesting aspects. We saw Chewbacca on Kashyyyk with his son. We did end up seeing Jar Jar's sad fate, where he's just reduced to being pretty much a performing clown for refugees on Naboo. I was really happy that we saw Cobb Vanth just return, and his aspects of bringing peace and justice to Tatooine. I think that there's some interesting stories to be told with him. It'll be interesting to see what we see from Cobb Vanth. We also saw, this was probably this one and the ones with the Acolyte of the Beyond. The one with the Church of the Force, where a number of members are returning Kyber crystals back to Christophsis. I thought that that was really good. I mean, that was probably one of the sadder ones. And it just showed the tenacity and commitment of the Church of the Force members to do something as simple as to return Kyber crystals that were stolen by the Empire to build the Death Stars, but just bring them back to Christophsis. I thought that that one was probably, if I had to pick the best piece of writing from the novel, it was probably that interlude with the members of the Church of the Force. Now, we also saw Mas Amedda on Coruscant with, he calls it being rescued, but I think from the perspective of the Ankle Biter Brigade, it was more so capturing Mas Amedda. But we saw them on Coruscant. I was happy that we got to see the Ankle Biter Brigade again. I'm not sure that we saw them in the second book, but it was an interesting aspect of the first one that I was hoping we'd see something again. I've done a video just in regards to this interlude, but just the Acolytes of the Beyond on Deveron, and just how with Yuptashu, just the different connections that really point to them being the precursor to the Knights of Ren, just in terms of some of their weapons, their red crystals, particularly the mask that Yuptashu hands out. I really do think that we're going to see the Acolytes of the Beyond evolve into the Knights of Ren. So that was another interesting interlude. We saw Lando, his return to Cloud City. I thought that that was an interesting one too. Just, I mean, the timing, it was near the end of the novel, and I probably would have enjoyed it more if it was near the beginning. I was really felt like I was pulled out of the Battle of Jakku and just the Rax and Sloane storyline. But we did see Lando back on Cloud City, just removing the last remnants of the Empire there. And then, by far my least favorite one, just because it really interrupted the flow of the novel, just with the pirate on the Annihilator, who's now renamed it Liberty's Misrule. So I thought that that one was just really interfered with the pacing. I thought that it was the worst one for that reason, but it was within the last 50 pages, and it was right after the Sinjir and political chapter that they had just done. So I think I had said something to the effect of like, you have to be kidding me. Like, you're not putting this interlude at this point in the novel. And it was a particularly long interlude too. So I think that out of all the interludes, I think the most interesting ones that we got was the one with the Church of the Force members, and then the one with the Acolytes of the Beyond. But I do think those last couple of ones really interfered too much with the pacing of the novel. But certainly, I've never really experienced it too many times outside of this trilogy, just with getting interlude chapters like that. So in that regard, it was an interesting aspect of the entire series. Now, just moving on to some of the aspects that I thought were disappointing, I think I need to start just with the ending of the novel. And it wasn't satisfying just because, like I've been saying, it created more questions than it provided answers. But I really didn't agree with the choice, and I thought that it was a bit of a mistake for Chuck Wendig to have Ray Sloane ultimately pretty much take Rax's place and enter into the unknown regions with what would become the First Order. It didn't sit well with me just because throughout the entire trilogy, it just seemed like Sloane was a character who was completely tied to the old empire. And throughout the novels, I mean, I can't count how many times Sloane had said, my empire, just referring to the fact that she was going to regain the empire that already existed. And there was really a nice line in this novel, in Empire's End, where Rax just tells Sloane, your empire has moved on without you. So I thought that that was a really good quote just to signify the fact that Sloane was attached to something that didn't even exist anymore. And really Rax was the visionary, with Palpatine, to have created the events that would be put in motion for the remnant to hide and eventually grow out into the unknown regions. So I was a bit disappointed with the fact that Ray Sloane not only killed Gallius Rax, but then specifically took his spot to go into the unknown region. In my mind, I thought it would have been better if maybe you did it the other way around. Maybe Sloane doesn't die, but just the fact that the First Order, in my opinion, would have seemed a lot greater had Gallius Rax followed through on his destiny with what was planned with the Emperor, and then led the First Order into the unknown regions. I also thought that the ending was a bit cheap, just because, I mean, like I've been saying, Rax was handpicked. He was chosen. It was his destiny to be the contingency for Palpatine. And then right as he's departing, he just happens to be taken out. Basically it was a 3-on-1 with Brenton, Nora, and Sloane all against Rax. So it was a bit cheap just because it was 3-on-1, and then you could see it as the ascendancy of Sloane, but really in the way that it played out, with the 3-on-1, how was she making herself to be a visionary or somebody who, quite frankly, deserves to be able to go into the unknown region and rebuild the Empire anew, and to be, quite frankly, better than the old Empire. I just thought that Sloane was just someone who was too tied to what the Empire was, and really didn't have the vision to be able to lead the remnant into what would become the First Order. I would have much rather seen Rax lead them into the unknown, and then carry out the plan that he had been sort of brought up with Palpatine to achieve the entire time. So I just thought that the ending was, I didn't like the choices that Chuck Wendig had made. And really, it left a lot more questions than answers. But I do think that Sloane, we're going to have to see something with Sloane in the unknown regions. And I don't think that she's going to fit in with what's going on in the unknown regions. She was really somebody who didn't like the brutality, and also just the focus on the Emperor and Vader, things like that. So I think we're going to see something with Sloane in the unknown regions, and probably doesn't fit in with what's evolving to become the First Order. But again, I felt that the ending was a bit cheap to get Sloane onto the Imperialis to go into the unknown regions. I would have much rather, but I would have preferred it be Rax. I would have to say that the second biggest disappointment was certainly the description of the Battle of Jakku, and just how very little we saw of the actual battle. Going in, I thought we were going to see pretty much the definitive work on paper that explained what exactly went on in the actual Battle of Jakku. But we saw very little. I mean, practically no planet-side ground battle, very little air battle on the planet. I mean, Akbar had virtually a non-existent role, same with Wedge. So I was pretty disappointed that we didn't see more of the actual battle. I thought that it was a gift in the actual writing of Chuck Wendig when the rebels had a tractor beam powerful enough to drag down the Ravager. I mean, I never questioned the physics in the Star Wars novels, but it seemed like it was a pretty big gift to have something like that in the rebel arsenal. And I was just wondering, well, why wouldn't the Ravager just hold up the ship that was falling? That said, though, it was a good piece of heroic writing for Commodore Agate. So I did think that that was an interesting aspect. I did like that chapter. But boy, I wished we saw a lot more of the Battle of Jakku than what we actually got. And finally, just in regards to some of the more disappointing aspects of the novel, these are probably my own fault, and again, I don't fault Chuck Wendig too much for these ones, but I was expecting to see something with Luke Skywalker. I was hoping that he would return in some aspect for the final battle of the Galactic Civil War. And then lastly, I wasn't hoping to get a Snoke tie-in. I thought that it would be pretty unrealistic if we saw for sure the origins of Snoke, or just something that was tantamount to his existence in the unknown regions, something to that effect. And certainly I didn't think that Gallius Rax was going to be Snoke or anything like that. But we did find something interesting in all fairness with Snoke. Just a quote here, just in regards to the Emperor believing that there was something out in the unknown regions, and I think that this specifically ties into Snoke. It does say that the Emperor was convinced that something waited for him out there, some origin of the Force, some dark side presence formed of malevolent substance. So I do have to, it would make sense that that is a reference to Snoke in some regard. So even though we didn't get anything definitive with Snoke, we did get something. So in all fairness to Chuck Wendig in that regard, I think the way that Snoke was introduced, or the lack thereof, I think that it was fine in the end. But really, again, Luke Skywalker, I was pretty sure that we were going to see something with Luke. Not that he was going to turn out to be the hero of Jakku, but certainly I thought that we would see that he had some hand to play. But really, the interesting aspect, though, now, since we haven't seen Luke, it really does speak to the importance of what he's doing just in his search with Jedi lore. I mean, every canon piece of material that I've read at this point, whether it's the Aftermath series or Bloodline, they're really building the importance of what he's doing and what he's searching for. It really is just kind of allowing the speculation to grow more and more. And that's why I think we'll probably first hear about it in episode 8. But now, since we haven't seen Luke, I'm really even more just wondering what he's doing at this point. So those are just some of my thoughts and opinions on Aftermath Empire's End. Again, in my heart of hearts, I have to admit that I was disappointed in this final chapter of the trilogy. And I wish I could say something like it was the exciting, thrilling ending to the trilogy, but I was disappointed with ultimately how it turned out. And just as far as a recommendation goes, again, too, just being honest, I wouldn't necessarily rush out and jump into the Aftermath series. I think that there's a lot more, there's better canon novels out there, and I'd be happy to recommend them in the comments section below if you guys want me to do so. Just leave a comment about which ones you would want to start with and which ones you've read, and I'd just be happy to recommend them. That said, though, again, if you want to read everything, not the worst book in the world. There certainly were good elements in there, as we discussed. And if you want to know how the Galactic Civil War ended and the initial steps of the transition to the First Order from the Empire, then certainly Aftermath is the book for you as well. But those were just some of my thoughts. I hope that you guys enjoyed this review. What we're going to do next is we're going to stay with the canon novels. I did pick up Lost Stars when I picked up Empire's End, so the next book we'll review, and I apologize for jumping around, but this Lost Stars has been probably the most recommended novel for me out of any novel. So we'll do Lost Stars by Claudia Gray next. Then we're going to stick with another canon novel. We'll read the Rogue One novelization. And since we're a few months past seeing Rogue One, I'm actually really happy and looking forward to jumping back into that story. But after those two canon novels, we're going to get back to the Legends. Our first Legends book will be Outbound Flight by Timothy Zahn. I've already read that one, so that one's all ready to go. And then after that one, we'll finally get to my favorite, Darth Bane, and we'll read Path of Destruction by Drew Karpyshyn. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. Again, a bit disappointed with the Aftermath Empire's End novel, but that said, it's nice to have completed it, and now we have a lot to look forward just into the new era and new age of the First Order. So I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I hope you guys have a really good day. I'll talk to you guys soon.